picture, right? Welcome to the Sikh Foundation Sikh Studies webinar, the first of its kind. We're so thrilled you could join us here. Please stay tuned to many discussions we will have over the next months with Sikh Studies professors from all over the world. Some of the most striking characteristics of our father were his unending curiosity, constant examination, and passionate determination to find answers. He loved to really question and engage deeply in everything from religion to politics to science. When our father was a young man, a teacher told him that light traveled in a straight line. He made his mark by making it his life's mission to prove that teacher wrong. His determination to prove that light can bend led him to the breakthroughs that helped to give birth to the field of fiber optics and to his interest in teaching and education. He understood that by questioning and critical thinking in the classroom, you can bring about tremendous change in the world. In the 40s, together with my mother, the love of his life, the 50s, my father became convinced that the world at large should know who the Sikhs are. And the Sikh people themselves should not forget who they are as they emigrate to other lands far from their original roots. In this setting, in 1967, our parents began the Sikh Foundation, a nonprofit, non-political, charitable organization whose mission is to educate others about our history and culture. Using his already established status and high visibility as the father of fiber optics, he brought light to the Sikh community. He and my mother worked tirelessly to introduce the world to the progressive ethics, the lyrical mysticism, and the heroism of the Sikhs, most notably through their tremendous endowments in the area of Sikh education. With a powerful method to communicate our beautiful stories and to share their commitment to their religion and their respect for their history. In doing so, they've made such a strong and meaningful impact globally, raising awareness about our Sikh culture. To that end, in his later years, our father decided it was important to bring Sikh educators to you, share their knowledge outside of the university. He said, as you know, the Sikh studies is broadly accepted and a number of new chairs have been created. The professors are working tirelessly in their given field and researching specific time periods they are interested in. However, people in general are not aware of the diversity and the quality of their work. These webinars should be created so that more general interest can be created. Therefore, we're inviting all professors currently teaching Sikh studies at various universities in USA, Canada, Europe, India, and Pakistan. So please enjoy the series. And now I hand the series over to my brother, the esteemed Raj Kapany.
Thank you, Kiki. Sorry. Thank you very much for having us open this wonderful meeting and our father's vision for Sikh studies, Punjabi studies. When I look at what I'm supposed to do today, it's to introduce Mark once more at another event. So what I did is I went on Google and Google Mark and to find 100 things that people had to say about him, all wonderful things. But to make it concise and condensed, I decided to call Mark to find out he was residing in Maui, Hawaii. And he told me he was contemplating, yes, shush, he says. He was contemplating retirement or trying to retire. But Mark, we will not let you retire. We will not. We need you as part of this group. We need you as a great supporter of the Punjabi and Sikh studies. And I asked Mark the question, I said, hey, how did you meet my father? What was the impetus that got you two together? And he said some wonderful things. He said he was doing his grad work at UC Berkeley in 1968. These are the LBJ years and the 40. I mean, this was way back 50 years ago, and he met Dad then, and they developed a USA First Sikh Studies program under the UC Berkeley Center of South Asia Studies, and that was released in 1974. Mark has taught religious studies for over 15 years at UC Berkeley. He's a distinguished professor of global studies at UC Santa Barbara. Mark is an expert in religious violence, South Asian religion, and politics. But more interesting, he's found the time in between all that to publish 28 books and over 300 articles. So Mark, I'd like to make this introduction and hand it off to you. And please don't live permanently in Maui. We need your inputs on these studies.
Well, thank you, Raj. You gave away a secret that people are supposed to assume that virtual background behind me is in fact where I am. That is my study in California, and I'm going to be there in a few weeks. And since this panel continues, I wanted to have the same background. But yeah, I've known your father, Narinder, for 50 years. I just came from the Punjab, where I've been teaching at Punjab University and working on research and religion and politics in the Punjab. So I knew everything about Sikhs and loved the Sikh religion and the community. And so I developed a fast friendship with your father, with Narinder. And we founded this first conference on Sikh studies in the United States to try to figure out what was going on, just to take the temperature of the field. And we created the first book on Sikh studies. That was, the first book came out, I think, in 1976. So a couple of weeks ago, shortly before your dad's sudden and untimely death, he called me on the phone. And I instantly knew who it was, that deep, resonant voice. Ma, this is Narinder Kapany speaking. Nobody can imitate that. And I said, oh, Narinder, so good to hear you. He said, well, you remember that conference we had over 45 years ago? He says, I think it's time to do it again. I think the time has come for us to reconvene scholars in Sikh studies and take the temperature of the Sikh studies at this particular moment in history. And he said, I know we can't do that because of the pandemic, but we can do that over Zoom. We can virtually get together in a series of forums every Saturday morning, and we can talk with the people who are helping to form and mold Sikh studies in the United States and the UK, Canada, North America, and the UK, and bringing life to this extraordinary tradition. And I said, that's great. And I said, but what do I have to do with it? He said, Mark, I want you to be the moderator. He says, you were there at the beginning, and now we've come full circle. I want you to be the moderator for these series. So that's why I'm here. If you want to know, what is this guy doing moderating this series, it's because Narinder asked me, and I never say no to when Narinder asked me to do something. So here I am. I'm delighted to be here. This is a field that I've been proud to be associated with all of my career, ever since I taught at Punjab University many years ago, and my frequent trips to the Punjab since then. I reestablished my connections with this wonderful community, which now, of course, is a global community. And that is really the subject of our series of discussions, how the field of Sikh studies, once a kind of regional concern, has become increasingly a global concern. So we have a wonderful lineup of people. We're going to go, one every other week at a time. I know if you've looked at the list of the panels we have lined up, you'll say, well, there are a lot more. Yeah, there are a lot more coming. We've already, beyond the, 8, I think, that were listed on the flyer. We have, after March, we have April, May, June. We've already lined up, and we're also talking about the fall. So if you're wondering, hey, what about X? Who teaches that? Y? we're going to get to X and Y. Just you wait. We want to cover the whole field. And we're going to start today with a wonderful person, Anshu Malhotra, a good friend, a colleague of mine at UC Santa Barbara, and the current holder of the first chair in the University of California system, which Narendra Kapany established when I was the founding director of the program in global studies, now the Department of Global Studies. And I said, Narendra, we tried for years when I was at Berkeley to create a chair in Sikh studies. Well, now I'm developing a whole new program and we've got the opportunity. Do you want to be a part of it? And he just jumped at the chance. He said, absolutely. So we created the first chair in Sikh studies in the UC system as a part of the global studies program here at UC Santa Barbara. Gurinder Singh Mann was the first chair holder. I was when he retired, I was the interim chair holder. And after international search, we found a colleague of mine at the University of Delhi, Anshu Malhotra, who just recently joined us. Anshu, it's been just year before last that you came to Santa Barbara.
Well, it's almost 2 years since I've been in Santa Barbara. I came in sort of March 2018. So yeah, a little bit less than 2 years.
Anshu is a celebrated historian at Delhi University and a distinguished scholar of the Punjab. And we're so delighted to have her as part of the series and delighted to have her at the University of California, Santa Barbara. So Anshu, are you still a newcomer or you have had a chance to really become a Californian by now?
Thank you, Mark. Let me begin by saying that I'm so thrilled to be here today and to, be the first guest in this wonderful series that Dr. Narendra Kapany thought of and that, you are facilitating and his family is facilitating. And I also want to say that it's a privilege to be occupying this, wonderful chair of Sikh and Punjab studies at the University of California at Santa Barbara. And I understand how much of a privilege it is and how much of a responsibility it is. And I'm fully cognizant of, what this position means. So let me start by just saying that. Am I a Californian now? With the last 1 year, the pandemic has made sure that one is confined to one's house virtually. So unfortunately, I have not really had very much opportunity to move around and see places and see California, which is so beautiful. But I hope that in time I will get that opportunity.
Yeah, and by now I understand that you've really connected with the other Sikh studies chairs and Punjab studies programs throughout the University of California system, which are significant. And by the way, this is a message out to anybody who's watching this on Zoom right now. If you have questions, we've disabled chat, so it won't be disturbing during the discussion. But there's a Q&A format. So if you have any questions or ideas, post them there. And then towards the end of our conversation with Anshu, Professor Malhotra, I'll check the Q&A and ask as many as I can, as many as we have time for. So if you have any questions, any concerns, post them on the Q&A and I'll get around to it sooner or later. So back to Professor Malhotra, who occupies, by the way, the Kunadan Kapany chair. And when Narendra and I established this, he named it in honor of his mother, a really quite remarkable woman. And now, Professor Malhotra, you've had a chance to connect with some of the other Sikh Studies and Punjab Studies program in the University of California system. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And even more excitingly, this is the headline news, tell us about the really extraordinary University of California system-wide project on Punjabi studies, of which you're a co-principal investigator. You've only been here 2 years and you're already a co-PI of this really important project.
Yes, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak about this really exciting new language learning program that has started off across the UCs in virtual classroom. This is available if you register for this program. So I've been very fortunate to have actually connected with a few other UCs. Really, it was UC Davis that reached out to me. They were going ahead with this program of, I think there was a lot of students who wanted Punjabi language, Punjabi heritage students who wanted Punjabi language to be taught. And UC Davis was, creating this project. They were going to apply to what is called the Innovative ILTI, Learning Technology Initiative of the UCOP, the UC Office of Presidents. And they applied for this grant and we got it. And they came to me and asked me if I wanted to be a co-PI. And of course I jumped at this opportunity. And this led to me meeting other UCs because UC Santa Cruz is also a part of this project, was the co-PI. And now that the language is being, and the first class has just happened on 5th of January. So, the program has actually taken off. And due to enormous amount of work that has come from UC Davis, UC Santa Cruz, and of course, UC Santa Barbara, that has also been a co-PI. And now, UC Irvine, UC Riverside, they have contributed towards, the instruction of this this program, and it's now available across the UC. So it's really a wonderful project, and I think.
How does it work? Are there particular campuses that are involved, and do they have like virtual classrooms, or which campuses are involved, or can anyone at any campus at the UC take part of this?
So it's available across the UCs. So all the UCs, students who register for this program, for this class, can actually participate in it. But initially there were 3 co-PIs, and the lead PI was UC Davis. And then, other UCs have contributed towards instructional costs and things like that. So it's really become a UC-wide project, even in the way it has taken off. So it has brought the Sikh studies chairs together in some senses in this.
Now, previously, I know Berkeley has for some 25 years taught Punjabi. Although I have to tell you, when I was a graduate student there about 50 years ago, Punjabi was not taught anywhere in the United States.
Right.
And I was going to Punjab and I wanted to learn Punjabi. And so I went to my Hindi teacher. I had studied Hindi for some years. And I said, I'd like to learn Punjabi. And he said, oh, I'll teach you Punjabi. I said, oh, really? Do you know it? He said, no. He said, but I've always wanted to learn it. So I'll keep like a week ahead of you. And that's how I first learned Punjabi. I come to think of it, I may have been the first student of Punjabi in the University of California system. I didn't think of that until this minute, but I think that may be right. and now you have
precious moment that we are connecting with the, sort of student zero of the Punjabi language program. And lots of other students are taking it. I just want to add that there is also, this program has been conceived. Everything is available online. It's a very exciting project. It's really cutting edge technology that is available. There's also a mobile app where students can learn, the alphabet of the Gurmukhi script and practice it. And, so it's a really exciting project, and it's a cutting edge project. And a lot of hard work has gone into it, and I really appreciate the work done at UC Davis and other campuses, including Santa Cruz. So yeah, it's a wonderful project. But I don't think Punjabi is Hindi, but yes, if you know Hindi, I think you can understand bits of Punjabi. So certainly.
Well, that was his point. At least he had some base to work off of. So how many students are there now in the program?
In the Punjabi program?
Yeah, no, you say it's already started, right? Yeah.
So the classes have started. I'm not exactly sure the number, but about, I think, 25 or 30 students to begin with. And this is the ILTI project. So, it will be taught. This is elementary introductory Punjabi to begin with. And we hope that the community is going to, support us so that we can actually continue with this program.
Yeah, in addition to Berkeley, of course, UC Santa Barbara taught Punjabi from time to time. I think Riverside also has taught Punjabi.
I think Santa Cruz has had a program of Punjabi teaching since 2012, and Berkeley, as you said, for 25 years.
And as Davis previously had Punjabi language, of course, that's an area that's been a heartland of the Sikh community around Marysville and Yuba City for some years.
Right. But I don't think they had, so there was a lot of interest among students in initiating this project at Davis. And as you said, it's a Central Valley area, and there's a lot of Punjabi heritage students who are there. So they were very, very keen. And I'm so glad Davis took the initiative and has started this.
Yeah, for years, the only radio station in Punjabi language was in Yuba City in California. So that's that would be there.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. And so what is your role going to be in this continuing project?
So for the moment, we are just, it's just starting off, and we hope that we can continue. So I'm giving for the moment, contributing amongst others towards instructional costs of, this project. But let's just hope that there are ways in which we can continue with this this language teaching, and that we can get ways in which we can, have financial backing for this project.
So professors from different campuses, the University of California, are contributing to the teaching, right? Is that the way it works? Yeah. So you'll have your share. They'll tap you for a couple of weeks duty, and then somebody else would take over. Is there one person coordinating the whole thing?
So we have an instructor who has been hired to do it. So there's an instructor, and there's a virtual classroom, and it's from what I can see, it seems to have taken off quite well. So let's just hope that this is something that can be sustained.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, we have so much to talk about. So tell us about the University of California, Santa Barbara. I know you've only been there for 2 years, so I haven't really had a chance to develop things fully, but can you tell us in general what kind of things are going on with relationship to Sikh studies at UC Santa Barbara?
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to do so. So, I have, I want 2 or 3 ways in which to develop the Sikh studies program at UC Santa Barbara. So one, of course, is just a pedagogical way, teaching something on Sikh history and Punjabi history. And I'm happy to know that this is this quarter, I'm doing a course on what I call aspects of histories of Punjab and the Sikhs. I have taught this in the spring quarter earlier, and this is the second time I'm doing it. So that's one aspect of it. I'd like to speak about it if you want. I'm also hoping to, initiate this time a kind of an annual lecture that is associated with the Punjab and Sikh Studies Center that we have at UCSB. And we will have, so this time I've collaborated with the Global Studies Colloquium because of the pandemic and how difficult it is to organize something. But we have the first lecture that will be taking place on 10th February. Professor Inderpal Grewal will be, speaking on the visual histories of partition, 1984 and Modi's India today. So that's the first of what should hopefully be, a series of lectures, annual lectures. And then I'm also, thinking in terms of having a conference, perhaps next year, once the pandemic is hopefully over and we can actually meet people in person. And I'm hoping to collaborate here with UC Davis, which seems to be very keen, and with the community. I've spoken to, people at UC Davis campus and in the community who would be willing to actually collaborate on this conference that I hope to organize. So, there are different sorts of things that I'm contemplating.
Yeah, that's great. Narinder Kapany was such a fan of and a collector of Sikh art in his life. He'd be very thrilled to see this kind of focus on Sikh art. And that's one of the things that you're interested in your own research, right? I think, can you tell us a little bit about that?
So that's something that I keep thinking about, the way in which we can use visual materials, right, to write, because they always yield something different, than what a normal sort of textual archival material will yield. And I am a historian, and I like to work in the archive. So I want to initiate. It's not something I have done really very much so far. I've sort of forayed into it a little bit, but not really, dug my teeth into it, so to speak. But I do want to, in my future work, try and work with visual sources as well, because I think the insights that you get with visual sources tend to be different from the insights that you get from textual sources. And I know, Dr. Kapany has this wonderful collection of paintings and the sort of contribution he's made to museums and so on. So that's something that I would really like to tap into and work towards. But again, as you just said, I've been here only a couple of years, and one of those 2 years has been a year of confinement. So but definitely that's something that I would like to work on. And more than that, I would like to encourage students to look at these sources as available to them to write, wonderful histories and conceive of projects that have different sorts of materials that can be, used as resources.
Yeah, I remember one time you were talking about paintings you had seen of the court of Ranjit Singh. And it showed a role of women in those paintings that were not apparent in the textual sources.
Yeah.
And you thought that the paintings really could reveal a whole different side of the whole complex relationship with the court, and particularly the role of women. Can you say something about that? I don't know whether you've written anything further on it, but that seems so intriguing to me.
Well, certainly. I think, I want to just say two things. Firstly, that there has actually been a new book that has come out on the role of women in Ranjit Singh's court. So you can say that some of the things that I wanted to do have already been done. And there is another colleague in Pakistan, Nadra Khan, who has also looked at actually architecture and paintings, like frescoes that are there in Pakistan, Punjab. So there is very interesting work that is being done over here. So paintings, and it's very difficult to talk about it unless one is focusing on a painting and saying, okay, this is what this painting is actually showing. But certainly, I think images and the kind of materials that they carry, what they depict, what is happening in a painting, right, can give you a very different alternative idea of what, as I said, textual sources. You can, maybe they'll align, maybe they will not align, I don't know, but that there is a possibility of excitement that's there. And I think certainly more and more historians, and I think art history is a very developed field now, and it's just that those who've been trained in textual sources very often do not use the other sources that are there.
Right.
Just waiting to be tapped.
Yeah, so tell me about your course. The course is on aspects of Sikh history. So that's an interesting notion, aspects. So you're not looking at the whole of Sikh history, you're just focusing on certain, tell me what that means.
So it's called Aspects of Histories of Punjab and the Sikhs, and it's a very eclectic course because I wanted to do bits and pieces of things just to introduce students to the wider idea of what Punjab is as a historian. So today, if you're from India, you'll look at Punjab as the Indian Punjab. And if you're from Pakistan, you'll look at the Pakistani Punjab. And then there's, of course, this whole diasporic Punjabis who exist in, very many parts of the world. So
including yourself.
Sorry?
Yeah, including yourself.
Including myself, absolutely. So, so the idea was to sort of give them a sense of the colonial and the pre-colonial notion of what Punjab is, right? So, and also give a sense of the territorial and demographic shift that takes place at various points of time in history, right? So the idea of territoriality, the idea of demography and demographic change. In fact, I think 1947 has been an epistemic change in multiple ways. And I think for the students to understand that, they need to go back and look at what the heritage is. So, so the idea was to, give them a sense of that. So the course actually tells them a little bit about this. What is Punjab? What is Punjabiyat? It tells them a little bit about the Sikh gurus. It tells them a little bit about the colonial past in South Asia. So, a few moments that have been highlighted, for example, the Jallianwala Bagh moment or the 1947 partition moment. And then it also covers a bit of, the Sikh diaspora in the West Coast, for example. So the Gadar movement in the West Coast, the idea of, the cultural heritage of the Sikhs in some ways, the bodily symbolism of the Khalsa Sikhs, and what it means, for example, after 9/11 and so on. So it's a lot of, as I said, it's an eclectic course, but gives them a sense of different aspects of Punjabi and Sikh pasts.
And of course, this is the last, 200 years, 150 years, the Punjab is one of just extraordinary change, as you indicate. Of course, the partition being perhaps one of the most dramatic. But a lot of your own research focuses on the end of the 19th century. And I know you've done some work on the Sikh Sabha and the rise of new movements and the formation of a new kind of Sikhism in a way. And, the traditions in their essence never change. I'm not implying that. And yet in the social context does. And so the response to it does change. And so what were some of the factors that made late 19th century Punjab so dynamic and so changing?
Multiple factors, of course. I think the coming of the colonial state and the kind of policies and sort of capitalist agriculture, for example, that is introduced in Punjab, the picking off and the creation of certain ideas of, for example, the martial races and who the martial races are, and the sort of the social reformers who try to grapple with this kind of change that is taking place in society, and the competition for getting into government organizations and jobs and so on. So there is a lot of change that is happening, and what social reformist movements that I've looked at, for example, the Arya Samaj movement or the Singh Sabha movement or the high caste organizations that came up at this point of time and so on, are all trying to figure out how to rework their lives in order to be relevant and move towards a modernity, and a modernity that they understand what that is. So a lot of it focuses on reorganizing the domestic life, right? And women become central to this. So a lot of what I did for my earlier work was to look at, this literature, and they used press copiously. So there's a lot available for one to actually sift through and figure out what it is that they are trying, and what is the demand from women, and how do they try to change their lives, and if possible, how women react accept, participate, respond to these various changes that are taking place around them. So that has been part of my earlier work. But I am very centrally interested in questions of not just identity, which is a religious-based identity, but also questions of caste. Caste is not sometimes taken very seriously. It is and it's not, So you will come across two very different sorts of points of view. Those who will say, oh, you really don't have Brahmanism in Punjab, right? And so caste is not important in Punjab, right? And on the other hand, today you see that there is a lot of Dalit assertion taking place in Punjab. And in fact, in terms of sheer percentage, Punjab is a state where you have the highest percentage of Dalits in India. So what does caste mean? And of course, my central concern has always been, I call myself a feminist historian. So, gendered identities and the meanings and the changing meanings of sexualities are very important to me. So I really try to look at all of these, ideas of changing gendered identities, religious identities, caste identities, and so on. So, those are my questions.
So let me ask you, because you brought up the topic, and of course you occupy the Kunadan Kaur Kapany chair. Do you think the role of women in the Sikh tradition has not been sufficiently understood or sufficiently studied?
Again, I would say, it has been studied to an extent, but not to the extent it could have been, I would say. And very often, so one strand of work comes from scholars who are trained in philosophy, and that is to look at, to make a very strong statement about, an egalitarian place that women had in society, according to the scriptural study of Sikh scriptures. So, that you have that kind of a statement, but a historian obviously looks at a historical context. And there has been some amount of work. For example, my colleague at Waterloo University in Canada, she has worked on, gender and Sikh community. But there could have been much more work. I know there is a lot of new work happening in this area, and I hope more and more people will be working. As I just said, there's a new book, that a young historian in Oxford has written. Priya Twal has written this book on the Ranjit Singh state, and she looks at his wives and the very, very significant political role that they played. So there is exciting work that is happening, but I would say that not enough. There needs to be much more.
Yeah, but that brings up a wider question about what Sikh studies is as a field. Years ago when we had our first conference in Sikh studies, I guess I thought of Sikh studies, as many people did, as primarily the study of the scriptures, the Guru Granth Sahib, the Dasam Granth, the other important early texts. And early Sikh history, the period of the Gurus and early Ranjit Singh maybe, but that was it, and that was the core of what Sikh studies is. But recently Pashara Singh had a conference at Riverside, and I looked around the room and I realized most of the scholars there and the participants, they don't do this kind of narrow script. I don't mean narrow I don't mean in a pejorative sense, but this very specific textual and ancient historical work. They write about all kinds of things: Sikhs in diaspora, Sikh art and culture and relationships. And so I guess the question I'm going to ask you, and the question I'm going to ask each of the panelists in all of the sessions that we have, is what is Sikh studies? From your point of view, what is Sikh studies?
So, I can answer that question in multiple ways, and let me try and, give you 2 or 3 different ways in which we can imagine Sikh studies, I would say. So certainly, it's absolutely vital that the traditions, the scriptures, the textual sources be studied, because that's in some senses the fount of a religious tradition and so on. But there is a very important connection between the past and the present, right? And I think the questions that we are interested in at present shape the questions we ask of our past, right? And so, you will see that the way the Sikh studies has developed from, let's say, a very prickly period that it went through in the 90s and mid-90s, particularly, to, I think, a little more, we've come to more significant kinds of questions that are being asked, and people are not so prickly, perhaps, hopefully, anymore. And you can ask questions that historians, for example, ask of specific contexts. So, one of the things, for example, that I might tell you is that if we focus only on Sikhs, then it seems that Sikhs are living, in isolation, which is not the case, right? So Punjab, if you just look at pre-colonial Punjab, colonial Punjab or even pre-colonial Punjab, Punjab, that is not the Indian Punjab that we know today, had a majority of Muslim population, right? So something like over, just a little over 50 or 51% of the population is Muslim, and then something in the 30s is Hindu, and then, the Sikh population actually, the percentages change from the census in 1881 to the census in 1931 from, I think, 7% to, 14 point something percent. So you have to look at, I would say, in the context in which the Sikhs as a community found themselves, right? So that's another way of looking at it. Well, another way of looking at it, the way the Sikh studies as a program should develop and grow, is that which disciplines are the scholars coming from, right? So if the scholars coming from, let's say, anthropology or doing ethnographic studies, they're going to look at contemporary society, whereas someone who was trained, let's say, in religion and looking at religious texts will perhaps look at religious texts that have emanated in the 17th century or the 18th century or the 19th century. So this will change. And then finally, I would also like you to think about it in the context of where the Punjabis as a people reside, right? So present contexts in which people find themselves in. So if you're in Indian Punjab, for example, one big question, as we see happening around today in Delhi, is the farmers' protest, right? And you might be interested in wanting to figure out why this is happening. What is it? What is the background to this? Is it the Green Revolution? And that's what you want to investigate. Is it what happened in the colonial period, the way in which Punjab was made into, it was a heavily irrigated area, the big canals, irrigation canals were developed by the colonial state. It changed, made Punjab into, a kind of an agricultural society of the kind it was not before that. What did it mean to communities who lived in Punjab before that, the pastoral communities? So I'm just thinking here about, for example, Niladri Bhattacharya's new book on the emergence of this kind of an agrarian Punjab. So again, where you might be situated. Punjabis, as you know, have started migrating in the late 19th century. And they did not just move to, they moved into East Asia, they moved to Africa, and of course, some of them came to the West Coast in North America as well, and then, of course, the UK. And then you have a second wave of, diasporic activity that takes place in the post, post the new sort of race laws that change and allow for different kinds of migrants to come in. So, again, so the perspective that you will have and the questions that you will ask, whatever kind of study that you're doing, will sort of emanate from the subject positionality that you have in society today. So I really believe that Sikh studies as a discipline will grow with this, right? And I see that happening already. I have seen, some of the new literature, for example, that looks at the 18th century, the 19th century, tends to see what is happening in larger parts of the country and tries to connect what is happening in Punjab with, what are in some ways things that you see in other parts of the subcontinent as well. So I think the discipline is set to grow and take off and be very, very exciting. And all of these, things that I have enlisted over here will impact the way the discipline will grow and change.
Well, that's a very optimistic answer, and it's also a broad tent. It means even people like me can be consider ourselves to be a part of Sikh studies, and
Absolutely.
I appreciate it. Now, Anshu, I'm looking at the list of questions, and we have a bunch. I hope you're willing to take some questions. And at the beginning, there's several, starting with Sonia Dami and others who are asking about the Punjabi language program. They're interested. They want to know, well, first of all, is it, can anybody take these courses, or is this only for UC students? Is it
it's for UC students, but I will direct all questions on Punjabi language to my colleague at UC Davis, Nicole Ranganath. She has been, absolutely vital to sort of organize this program. But for the moment, they are open to UC students across the.
Because these are 4-credit courses, so you have to be an enrolled student in order to be able to take it, right?
Yeah.
So, so several people want to know whether students from other universities can, other than UC, can take it online. Somebody JNU in Delhi wants to participate. Is that possible?
No, I don't think so. But I would tell the students coming from JNU and other places in Delhi that they have a wonderful school called the Zaban School of Languages, which teaches Punjabi, Braj, all kinds of languages, Persian, Urdu, Telugu. So that's a wonderful school for them to actually resource for them to go to.
For students who are in North America or the UK who may be watching this, are there other programs that are available for people who are not enrolled in those universities? Is there any place where you can go and study Punjabi?
You might be, but you'll probably have to find out. Maybe Berkeley, since they have an old program, I don't know how many students they have. That's something that one can look into and find out. But since it's an online program, it might be possible to, in future include more and more people. But so again,
you're talking about
how much we'll be able to sustain the program, right? So the community has to sort of put up their hands and say, we want this program to continue and, increase the sizes. Maybe we can increase the number of people who can do it and increase the sections, have more people hired to do it and so on. Because, we have the basics now, we have the program that's there. So the modules have been created and it's really an ability to sustain it.
Yeah, so right now, if you're not in the UC system and you want to study Punjabi and you're in the United States or UK, where can you go? What can you do?
Well, I don't know, Mark. I don't know.
These are questions people are asking. I'm just passing on the questions I can see on the screen.
I really don't know. I mean, that's a good question, and it's a question that we should take up as UCs and as people who are interested in making sure more and more people who want to learn this language are able to learn this language. So it's a question for us to keep in mind for sure.
Okay, and if people want to know more about the program, the coordinator at Davis is tell me her name, and do you have her email?
So she is Nicole Ranganath. She's the adjunct professor in UC Davis, who is a program manager for this ILTI program. So she would be a good person to answer some of these questions. And the instructor is Dr. Kuldeep Singh, who's been hired to sort of, instruct this program.
Okay, so if you Google Punjabi language UC Davis, will you find out all the information you need?
I will figure this out and I'll share it with,
Okay, well, I when I'm trying to figure something out, I turn to Google. I'm assured, feel reassured that 2/3 of God is in Google, and so therefore, anything you want to know. Okay, we have some other questions. So your Sikh studies course, somebody is asking how that's different from other Sikh courses. I think you've kind of gone through that.
I just want to add one more thing to the Sikh course that I have, created right now, and I'll be happy to create new kinds of courses that deal with different aspects, depending on the interest again. I mean, how many students who push me to say, let's do this now, and I'll be happy to create more courses for Punjab and Sikh studies.
Mm-hmm. So there are questions about the development of the, Ram Singh wants to know about the development of Sikhs in the 20th century and how, I assume that part of the question is, has the tradition changed as it's moved globally?
Sorry, I did not understand the question. Say it again.
Well, as Sikhism becomes increasingly a global religion, what changes? What's different? I know when I've been asked about that, I said, well, there's superficial differences. At one point, when Sikhs came to California, they felt that they had to give up the caste. They had to give up the men had to give up their beards and trim their hair. Younger generations now are returning to the symbols, returning to the 5 Ks.
Right.
But that's just a superficial thing. I mean, I know there are gurdwaras where in Lungar, for example, they provide chairs, particularly for the older people. People like me have trouble getting up and down on the floor. But these are superficial things. Are there other things you think are different?
I think, the question of for Khalsa Sikhs, the 5 Ks can be very important. So I would not call that a superficial thing. I think that would be very, very fundamental. So I think when some Sikhs came in early 19th century, some of them took the decision, if they were Khalsa and Amritdhari Sikhs, to cut their hair and their beards, because to assimilate in the society that they were coming into. Whereas you'll find that at various points of time, it has become sorry. Some people have, because you are in a community, in a culture that is very different from perhaps the one that you were born into, or where your family comes from, you want to preserve it. So the desire to preserve something becomes very, very significant, and so you make a conscious effort to make sure that the younger generation is, brought up with those heritage marks and so on. So, it will have, I guess, again, as what I said earlier, that at different points of time, how a community looks at itself, right, play a very important role in the way in which you will manifest those things in your day-to-day life, right? So, for example, the 1980s and early 1990s was a difficult period. There was, a kind of a demand for Sikh homeland that was going on in India, and it created a very painful kind of a situation. So people became even more conscious of inculcating, certain cultural identities. That may not be the case today. Or people, identities are not fixed, as you know. Identities keep changing, and we all carry multiple sorts of identities within us, right? So on different occasions, we try to be different people, right? So it is the complexity of all of this, that makes us who we are. And I think it is these complexities which need to be studied and by scholars, right? Not a fixed thing. It's not a fixed thing, I would say.
So what do you make of people like Nikki Haley, the governor of South Carolina, who, I mean, you wouldn't know it from her name and her way she comports herself that, her family's Punjabi and she grew up as a Sikh. I mean, is she still a Sikh?
I don't know. You'll have to ask Nikki Haley that particular question. But it's quite clear to me that she is a member of the Republican Party and would like to make a political career for herself through being, a Republican politician. So what that requires her to do, she would do that, right? Does that intervene and interfere in her being a Sikh? I don't know. I will need to know her personally for me to be able to answer that question. But that's what I mean, that, in the diaspora, there are multiple ways in which you can demonstrate, perform, live your identity, right? And it will really depend on what it is that becomes significant for you. Right.
So someone is asking whether the way Sikh studies is developed, does this can this be used as a model for the way other communities study their tradition in the United States? Have we set up something that's really emulatable by other communities?
I don't know which particular communities you might be talking about, but I think the way in which Sikh studies has sort of developed is really, really interesting because like within the UC system itself, now we have how many Sikh studies chairs? So certainly the Sikh community has to be congratulated on this because they have, taken it upon themselves to fund chairs of Sikh studies, to make sure that scholarship of Sikh studies flourishes in North America. So certainly that is very, very creditable. I don't have enough experience here to know how other religions and religious traditions may be studied in the US, or perhaps Mark, you are a better person to answer that question. But I have a sense that there is something that already exists, but is Sikh studies a model to follow? Perhaps, certainly I think the community is very invested in this, and that's always a good thing.
So one of the aspects of Sikh studies that you mentioned, that is studying the role of art and its relationship to the tradition. We have a question about that. Can you say something more about how Sikh art, particularly the kind of material that is collected by Dr. Kapany, can be useful for researchers and can be helpful in understanding the way the Sikh tradition is developed?
Okay, that's a very general question, but let me give you, specific answers. So, for example, I don't know if my colleague Nadra Khan is sort of here, but, she has done this work very recently on Ranjit Singh, the architectural remains of Ranjit Singh's empire and his samadhi, and the way the buildings were created, what does that mean? The way they were decorated, what does that mean? And what is the way we can understand, a different kind of a perspective on the history of Ranjit Singh's period. So I think that's absolutely fabulous. The fact that there were Havelis that were made by women, by some of his wives, that they were decorated by their wives, that they were estates that his wives had, tells you something, about the kind of power that they wielded, right? Another historian has gone on to actually say the kind of power that they wielded in the consolidation of his Sikh kingdom. And that's a perspective that has come from textual and visual sources. So that's absolutely fabulous. Another example that comes to my mind is that I don't know so much about the gurdwaras here as yet, but in India, you go to many, many gurdwaras and you'll find that there is art that is a very important aspect of those gurdwaras. And very often, they're showing, depicting scenes of martyrdom of various Sikhs, right? So there is, you can have multiple questions. And the questions don't just have to be, what is the content of what is being depicted, but you could also ask, why is this content being depicted, right? And how do people who come into this space, how do they view something like that is being depicted? So, there are multiple questions that can come from looking at a visual image, right?
So there is a role, not just for Sikh art in general, but also the remarkable collection that Dr. Kapany has made, and which is partly portrayed in this wonderful book that Sonia Dami has edited and created on the collection and the significance of it. And as you point out, it shows the historical development at different points. And you could use art to complement what you learned through texts and other kind of historical sources.
Right.
Well, we kind of come full circle. I know there are other questions, and there always are, but we also have other sessions of this panel series. And since we've been on talking now for a little over an hour, I think it's time to thank you for your very generous amount of time that you gave, and for all the good work that you're doing. And for starting us off on the series so effectively. So Dr. Malhotra, thank you so much for being our guest today. And I'm looking forward to our next discussion in 2 weeks, and then this continuing series, which seems like it's just going to keep on going forever, just like Sikh studies itself. Right. So thank you very much for being a part of this. And we'll see you.
It's such a pleasure talking to you, and thank you once again, the Sikh Foundation, for organizing this, and to Kiki and Raj Kapany for, continuing with a dream of their father on this one. So thank you so much, and it's been a complete pleasure participating.
Everybody else in 2 weeks, come back and join us and tell your friends. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.